Hey everybody, Rob from Karma Comic Chameleon coming at you with a new ProRevenge story. Building an apartment for Stepson, runs off with everything, but ends up owning everything of Stepson in the long run. Let's jump right in. ProRevenge videos seem to do really well on this channel, so let's try something new. If we can get 10,000 likes on this video, I'm gonna get my wife to narrate some of the dialogue in one of the upcoming ProRevenge videos. Remember to join the KCC Discord, link in the description below, and also hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. Hello Reddit people, first time posting in this area of the site. I have been reading these posts for a while now, and found out recently of a story that my mother told me about my great-grandfather. I got more information about this from my grandmother, who confirmed the story to me and added more details that my mom forgot about, as this happened when my mom was young. Sorry if it's long, but I need to set up details to understand the story well. So this is about my great-grandfather, who I call Pop Pop, who was on my mother's side. He was a farmer growing up with his 12 brothers and sisters. He had a large family and was the middle child. He quit school when he was in 3rd grade to help out with the family's farm. After he turned 16, he worked for a plumber who would sell the business to him later on. When he was in his late 20s, he met and years later married his wife. His wife, my great-grandmother, or Mimi as my mother called her, was from a very wealthy family and was 10 years older than he was. Unlike Pop Pop, she was an only child and she was a widow from a very young age, as she also had an adult son, my great-uncle Bob, not his real name of course, at the time. Mimi's parents didn't live very long and had died early due to illness along with her first husband. I'm not sure what they died of, I think it was TB. The fact that she didn't have to worry about money helped her raise her son as a single mother, as she didn't have to work. When her son was 18, he met a girl at college and they got married within a few months. Mimi didn't really care for her, we will call her Jenny, and she clearly saw that she was just in it for the money, as Bob was Mimi's only child at the time. Jenny was from a high-class family with money. When my great-grandparents got married, she gave birth to my grandmother. It was an unusual birth, as Mimi was almost 40 at the time and was very unusual for her to turn out okay. Pop Pop was a very kind man, and even though Mimi had a lot of money, he felt that it was her money and he would still work for a living to provide. They lived very averagely. If you looked at their house, you wouldn't be able to tell that they were millionaires. At that time, they were living in a 2-bedroom house. My grandmother was only a baby at the start of the Great Depression. Mimi was not affected that much due to it, but Jenny's family was affected, as they made most of their money on Wall Street and banks that started closing. Jenny's father killed himself when he lost all his money, and Jenny's mother soon died after that. Jenny had 2 siblings who were all older and were on the other side of the country, with no way to contact them or get to them. Bob and Jenny were homeless. When Bob and Jenny called, Pop Pop told them to come live with them. No problem whatsoever. When Bob and Jenny came over, Pop Pop gave them the whole upstairs, pretty much kicking his family out onto the 1st floor, and renovated and added onto the house so they could come and go without waking his new baby up. He added an extra bedroom, a kitchen, bathroom, everything. Bob and Jenny were having a hard time finding work due to the depression, but Pop Pop told him not to worry, stay as long as you like until you can get back on your feet. This went on for about a year, until one day he noticed that it had been a while since he'd heard anything. While it was pretty typical to not see them every day, he hadn't spoke or even heard anything for about 2 weeks. He opened the door that he built between the 2 living spaces and saw the area empty. The furniture, bathroom fixtures, the stove, everything. Stuff that he bought and stuff that they brought with them. He had no clue what happened and called the police as he thought something was wrong. The police caught up with them 2,000 miles away living in Florida. It turns out Jenny's uncle died and left her with a huge sum of money, pretty much being able to rebuild their life overnight before the Great Depression. As soon as they collected the money, both Bob and Jenny moved out of the house and took everything with them, including Pop Pop and Mimi's items. Pop Pop was angry. He didn't care about being paid back. He just wanted his items he had let them borrow and just a goodbye. Just let them know that they were leaving or something. If they asked for the items, he wouldn't have had much of a problem, but he got no word from them and stole the items. As the stuff was easy to replace, he didn't want to press charges and drag out the mess. Mimi and him pretty much stopped communication with Bob and Jenny due to this. About 25 years later, Mimi has been tested positive for stage 4 cancer. At this time, my grandmother had given birth to my mother and was living in her own house with my grandfather. After she was tested positive, Pop Pop and Mimi sold their house, the same house, to live with my grandmother to be taken care of. My grandfather redesigned the basement of his house to have the two living in it. My grandmother had known that she'd had a half-brother named Bob and his wife Jenny, but that was about it. Mimi gave my grandmother his last known number. She wanted to at least try to tell them that she had stage 4 cancer and not much time left. My grandmother placed a call in and found out what had happened between the 25 years. Bob and Jenny never had any kids, but they still had her uncle's money. One thing about Bob and Jenny was that they were smart with the money and invested it, where Mimi never invested her money, nor did Pop Pop, they just let it sit. My grandmother was happy that she was finally going to meet her brother after all this time. However, they never showed up, even though they said they were going to. My mother said that the first time she saw them was at the funeral. Mimi passed away 2 months later, and my grandmother called them to let them know where it was. So they got to the funeral, and the first thing out of Bob's mouth was, "So, what is in the will?" Not even a hello. My grandmother had all greeted them, as she didn't know the history and why they disappeared, plus my grandmother was too overly nice to family, and was putting them next to the family seating when they saw Pop Pop. Pop Pop then said to them, "Sorry, only family is allowed to sit up front." Bob and Jenny started to contest when they saw the funeral guide. My grandmother was listed as an only child with nothing saying Bob or Jenny was related. It turned out that both Mimi and Pop Pop were angry by how they were treated all those years ago, so in Mimi's will and funeral arrangements were made to disown her son. They were strangers to the two. Bob and Jenny blew their top, and while my grandmother tried to cool things down, they left. Mimi's will left 85% to Pop Pop and 15% of it to my grandmother. It even made references that Bob and Jenny would get nothing and were disowned. Both tried to fight it, but it didn't work. However, I'm still not done with the revenge. This part is more natural development than anything else. My grandmother still kept in contact with her brother outside of Pop Pop's wishes. Pop Pop still didn't tell her what happened, since he kept saying that he had no son, and that she knew he wouldn't approve. My grandmother, grandfather, and my mother even visited them at their house during a vacation. My mother said that he always seemed two-faced along with Jenny. They would act nice, but it was more of an act. My mother brought this up, but my grandmother always shot it down. My grandmother was naive, and she heard from Bob on what happened between the two. Bob's story was that after a year, Jenny's uncle died and left them money. It wasn't a lot, a big lie, but enough to move out. When they went to tell Pop Pop about it, he blew up on them leaving and demanded that he wanted the money to pay for rent. Another lie. Pop Pop never asked for money. For a room that he built them, along with the labor and construction of the area. They had to leave under the cover of night to be protected from him, and that he brainwashed Mimi into disowning him and only came back because she was dying, which also was a lie. They didn't show up until the funeral and asked about the will when they first got there. My mother remembers clearly. Since Pop Pop owned 85%, he still had the majority of the money. Grandma wanted to give part of her money, but she had since spent a majority of it buying a house and doing major renovations to it. She would give him the money, but it would be after Pop Pop passed away. Since Grandma wanted to give money to her brother, they wrote up a contract that after Pop Pop passing, the money that Grandma got, 50% of it would go to her brother. So they waited and waited. That never came. What happened is too crazy enough not to tell. By this point, when the contact was made, my grandmother was in her early 40s. Bob and Jenny was in their mid to late 50s, while Pop Pop was in his 70s. Most of Pop Pop's siblings had passed away, and his health was always questionable. He smoked cigars, drank, and chewed tobacco on top of having bad knees, so at the time, we thought he'd had only a while left to live. He lived to be 103 years old. Bob and Jenny passed away around 20 years after the contract was signed by them and my grandmother. Since Bob and Jenny had no kids, and Jenny's other siblings passed away with no kids on their own, their money was given to my grandmother after no one else claimed it, since Jenny and Bob had no will. I'm not sure the details of how she did it, but she did get it. My grandmother later on found out that what they were telling her about the house was a lie. As she was cleaning out Pop Pop's room, she found the old police records and pictures about the apartment, along with Bob's and Jenny's records about how much money they got. All of the money was wasted away years later by Pop Pop. He got into heavy depression after Mimi passed away. He drank and gambled most of the money away trying to ease the pain. So even if he died later on, Bob would not have gotten much, if any of it. My grandma didn't know about Pop-Pop's money until she took over his finances when he went into a nursing home at the age of 102. Yes, at 100 he was still pretty active with his finances. That story jumped around a little bit, and the TLDR at the end actually does sum it up really well. It says, great-grandfather builds an apartment for homeless stepson. They run off in the middle of the night after uncle dies, giving the money to stepson's wife, and take everything in the apartment. Great-grandfather and great-grandmother disown the stepson with nothing in the will. Uncle cons his sister to give him the remaining money, but great-grandfather outlives uncle and uncle's money goes to his sister. Family squabbles are all too common, and it often all comes down to money in the end. It's really sad if you actually think about it. I want to thank OP for giving me permission to narrate their story today. You can visit them at the links in the description below on Reddit itself. Please go there and give them an upvote. Once again, this is Rob from Karma Comic Chameleon. I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I ask you to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share it with your friends, and we'll see you in the next one.